Okay, so this is video 15 on conditional proof. We can also call it conditional derivation. Conditional derivation would be more precise. So this is going to be one of 3 videos on problem set 7. The first video was video 14 on direct proof. This one is on conditional proof, and the final one will be on indirect proof. These are the 3 techniques for proving things that you want to use in problem set 7, and they will all be things that you will be tested on in test 4. So actually what I'm going to start by doing is going back and reviewing direct proof. And I'm going to do that by looking at one of the problems from earlier in this problem set right here. So this symbol here is the single turnstile. It means therefore. In the previous section on truth tables, we used this symbol, the double turnstile, for therefore. So this means that it can be proven using a derivation. This means that it can be proven using a truth table. And they turn out to be equivalent, which is fortunate. But that's the meaning of these 2 symbols. So what this says is that D can be inferred from these premises here. And it looks like there are a lot of them, but it looks like it's long, but actually there are only 3 premises. It's just that the first one is kind of complicated. So what we want to do is set up the problem properly. That means that we write the premises. A implies B, or C implies D and E. 2, not A implies B, and 3 is C, right? And then we write over here what we want, the thing that we're trying to prove, which is D. So we draw a line here, and then we draw this little bar here. This is called the Fitch bar. It separates the things we were given from the things that we infer. So what we now want to do is use these rules. This is the copy of the rules from the back of the book, to manipulate these premises until we can get to this conclusion. So what we've done is that we've assumed that all of these rules are valid, and we can show they're valid using truth tables. And then we say that if we can string the rules together to get a path from here to here, then we know that the whole argument is valid. All right. So now take a look at the premises. This first premise is a disjunction. The main connective is the or, right? And so on either side of it, you've got 2 things. You can imagine that we could just represent them with the script letters. This is script A, this is script B. This right here is the negation of script A. You see how this is the opposite of that? Well, that means by this rule here, disjunction elimination, that we can infer the other side. So that gives us, right here, C implies D and E. And we know that because of these 2 lines and or elimination. That's or elimination on 1 and 2. Now look at this. Here you've got C, and here you've got C implies D and E. That matches what's going on with this rule here. So now we can say that given C and D, and C implies D and E, we can write D and E. Conditional elimination, lines 3 and 4. And now we've got the D almost uncovered. Here, the D was all the way buried up in this long sentence, but we've broken it apart, and now it's almost all the way there. The D is the thing that we want. So now we can write 6D, and that's just and elimination on line 5. And we're done. We know we're done because we said we wanted something, and now we have it. All right, so that was direct proof, which is the most straightforward form of proof. And now I want to show you what's going on with conditional proof. And I'm just going to start by walking through one of the problems that the textbook uses as an example. So suppose you knew, just as a premise, R or F. And suppose you wanted not R implies F. Just given what you have here to start with, you're stuck because the only connective in line 1 is an or, right? But we know from the rule of disjunctional elimination that to do anything with an or, you also need the negation of one of the sides. So what are you going to do? Well, what we need to do is give ourselves some more tools to work with. So what we're going to do is called launching a subproof. What we're going to do is we're going to put a derivation inside a derivation. So we're going to draw another line here, and then another Fitch bar, and we're going to give ourselves a new assumption. We're going to give ourselves a new premise. And the premise that we're going to give ourselves is based on what's in the want line. The want line says that if we had not R, we could infer F, right? It says not R implies F. So I'm just going to show that over here. I'm going to show that if we happen to have not R, we would be able to get F. So F becomes a new want line. Right? So one of the important things, and I'm going to reiterate this as we go along, when you make new assumptions, you want to do it based on what is in your want line, because you can't just make any old, well, you can make any old assumption you want, but you have to be able to discharge it, and we'll see what that means in a second. But basically, you don't count yourself as finished until you are outside of this subproof. You need to exit the subproof, right? And so if you launch a subproof with the wrong assumption, you won't be able to get out of it. In this case, though, we can get out of it really easily because now we've got the two lines that work together to create disjunctional elimination. So now we have F or elimination lines 1 and 2. Oh, I didn't want to extend that. Here, I'll just put this down here. And then line 4, we can say not R implies F. And now we're going to use a new rule. The rule is conditional introduction. And we're going to cite the whole subproof. So that's lines 2 through 3. So conditional introduction is a new rule. Previously, we'd had introduction and elimination rules, right? We had introduction and elimination rules for and or. And then we only had introduction rules. We only had elimination rules for the conditional. And now the new rule we're adding fills in this spot here. And the way it looks is like this. See, this time the rule has a subproof in it. It says if you have an A, if you launch a subproof with A and you end the subproof with B, you can write A implies B and justify it using conditional introduction. So in general, we've got a set of rules for how to deal with subproofs. Logic. It's just all about applying rules and following rules. So these are the 5 rules. They're on page 143 of your text. The first rule says that you can start a subproof on any line and introduce any assumption you want with that subproof. So whenever you are just trucking along, right, and you want, here I am, I'm trucking along, I've got some stuff, I can always just do this and put anything here I want, anything. And that might seem like it's giving me too much power, but, with great power comes great responsibility. And so the remaining 4 rules here explain why you can't abuse Rule 1. And the big deal is that all subproofs must be closed by the time the proof is over. So I can say anything here, but I can only say the right thing here. This is the end of the subproof. I need to get to the right thing here, and then I can exit, and then I can finish the job. If I'm stuck inside all of these subproofs, then I'm never going to finish the problem. So how do you know what the right thing is? The right thing is based on the 4 final rules of inference. Conditional introduction is the one that we're talking about now. We'll also talk briefly about biconditional introduction. And then there's negation elimination and negation introduction. So you can start out any way you want, but you have to be able to exit. So think of it as taking out a loan. The bank has no standards whatsoever. The bank will just grant a loan to anyone who walks in the door and says, I want to invent a car that runs on water or, anything. But whatever it is, you have to pay it back. Another way of thinking about it is that you've got to have, when you start up here, you've got to have an exit strategy, right? In life, you always need an exit strategy. You can nest subproofs. So if I wanted, after I said anything there, I could put another one there, and I could nest them indefinitely, like Russian dolls. But I have to exit them in the same order that I started. And then finally, once something is closed, all the lines in that subproof are blocked off from future use. And that's because when I have a subproof, anything that I prove in here is based on this assumption. But I don't actually know that assumption. This is something that I threw in. It's not one of the real things that I know up here. So because I don't actually know it, I can't use any of the stuff that I'm inferring from it outside of the subproof. The subproof is like a hypothetical situation where this additional thing is true. But once I leave that hypothetical situation and return to the real world of the proof, I don't know these things anymore. All right, so now I want to run through some homework problems just to give you a better sense of how conditional proof works. And the first kind of homework problem actually gives you the frame of a conditional proof. and you just need to fill in the blanks. So here, let's just look at this one here. So what we want is a conditional. And this is generally going to be the case with conditional proofs. You're going to look at your want line and you're going to see a conditional there, and then you're going to assume the antecedent, that is the left-hand side, and then you're going to say want the consequent. So in this case, you assume not P, and that means that you want R. No, that doesn't work. We'll go back to this one. R, right? And you can see that R is down here at the end of the subproof. All right. So now we just need to figure out how we get different things from the existing rules. So how could we get Q or R from what's going on up here? Well, Q or R is both here and here. And to get what you have here, you need the not P. The not P is on line 3. So we're going to say that this is conditional elimination, lines 1 and 3. The next step is to apply or elimination to line 2 and 3. So here's your or on line 2, and there's your negation of the left-hand side on line 3. So what that gives you is not Q. So how do we get R from what's above? Well, that's or elimination and lines 4 and 5. And so finally now we've gone from having not P at the start of our derivation to having R at the end of our subderivation. So we can write not P implies R here, and then that would just be conditional introduction, lines 3 through 6. And you always want to cite the full range there, not just the individual lines. Okay, now I'm going to do a sample problem that's where you have to set up the whole problem. And I think I'm going to do number 2 in problem in part C. So let's take a look at this. This is what you want, and these two premises are what you have. So it will look like this. 1, what is it? A implies C and B implies D. A implies C. 2, B implies D. And then your want line is this whole thing here. A and B implies C and D. So, again, we're in a situation where we can't do anything with our premises on their own. So what we need to do is launch a subproof. Always, you start by trying to do direct proof. If you can't do direct proof, you do something that involves a subproof. And the easiest thing to do is that if you're trying to show a conditional, like this, you assume the antecedent and say you want the consequent. So the antecedent, the left side, is A and B, and what you want is C and D. Right? Okay, so actually you can immediately see how this line works with what comes before, because A and B are the antecedents to the two conditionals up here. But before you can do anything with that, you need to break those apart. So what we need to do is have A on a separate line and B on a separate line. And this is just and elimination on line 3 each time. Having and elimination, now that we've got these separately, we can apply them back up to the premises above the Fitch bar, 6 and 7. So 6, we'll say C, and 7 is D. Conditional elimination 1 and 4. And conditional elimination on 2 and 5. And then now we've got the two elements that we want here, right? We wanted C and D. We've got them on separate lines. We need to put them on the same line, C and D. And introduction, lines 6 and 7. And now we've gone from A and B to C and D. We've gone from antecedent to consequent, so we can infer the whole thing. A and B implies C and D, and that's conditional introduction, lines 3 through 8. Okay, the last thing I want to do is give you an example of a biconditional proof. So we're introducing two new rules this time. We've been talking the whole time about conditional introduction, but we also want to do biconditional introduction, which is just the same thing twice, basically. So up here, with the problem that we just did, what we did is assumed the left-hand side and showed the right-hand side, and then that allowed us to introduce a conditional. Let's look at number 5. This time we've got the double-headed arrow. We've got the biconditional, right? And so what we're going to do is introduce the left side and infer the right side, and then after that we're going to assume the right side and infer the left side, and then once we've done it both ways, we can introduce the biconditional. So it's A if and only if B, B if and only if C. So we start up here. A if and only if B, and B if and only if C, and our want line is A if and only if C. So we're actually going to have two subproofs now. One is going to start with A and end with C, and the other is going to start with C and end with A. And then when we're done with all of that, we can write A if and only if C, right? Notice that I'm going ahead and I'm sketching all this out in advance because I know how I'm going to do it. I don't know the details, but I know the broad frame. And that's important when you launch subproofs. You want to know how you're going to be able to get out of them. And with conditional proof and biconditional proof, you're just going to want to look at your want line and know that you're either going to go from one side to the other, or you're going to go in both directions. So this is an assumption for biconditional proof, and we want C. This is also an assumption for biconditional proof, and we want A. It's always important to write the want lines, and I've started asking people to also write what kind of proof it is, but I'm not being picky about that. But it's a good thing to do just to keep things in mind. So if you have A here, you know that you can get B by biconditional elimination, right? That's 1 and 3. And then if you have B, on line 5, you get your C by conditional elimination, lines 2 and 4. 6, so now we know that our assumption is line 6. 7 is going to again be B by conditional elimination. Now notice that we can't use anything up here anymore, right? This subproof has ended. So what we know on line 7, the things we know are lines 1, 2, and 6. But 6 is still can get us B, because C The C works here. The arrow goes both ways, so that gets us B. So this is lines 2 and 6. 8 is going to be biconditional elimination, and line 7 and line 1. And then the final line is A if and only if C, biconditional introduction, and it lines 3 through 5 and 6 through 8.